Aliens sent her as a joke bride to the human. The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the low vibrations of 17 different species, all attempting to maintain diplomatic composure, while secretly plotting each other's downfall. Ambassador Crix of the Vorthan Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes and cleared his throat in the peculiar whistling manner of his people. Today would be the day they finally dealt with the human problem once and for all. The humans had arrived in galactic society 3 years ago with their crude metal ships and primitive fusion drives. What they lacked in technology, they made up for in sheer audacity. They had somehow managed to defeat the hegemony fleet in the Proxima incident and had been demanding representation in the Council ever since. The established powers found this utterly unacceptable. Captain Jake Morrison sat alone at the human delegation table, reviewing the latest trade proposals on his datapad. His weathered face showed the strain of months of negotiations that seemed to go nowhere. The other species whispered among themselves in their native tongues, occasionally glancing his way with what he assumed was barely concealed contempt. Ambassador Crix stood and addressed the assembly. The humans had requested full membership in the Galactic Council, but such privileges came with certain traditions. One such tradition was the ceremonial bonding between species to demonstrate trust and cooperation. The Vorthan Empire would be honored to offer one of their finest citizens as a diplomatic bride to seal the alliance. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Nobody had mentioned anything about marriage in the briefings. The universal translator in his ear was having difficulty with some of the more complex diplomatic terminology, but the general meaning was clear enough. He was being offered a wife as part of some elaborate political ceremony. The other ambassadors nodded approvingly as Crix continued his speech. Of course, they would select only the most suitable candidate for such an important role. Someone who truly represented the finest qualities of Vorthan society. Someone who would help bridge the gap between their peoples and foster understanding between species. What Jake could not see was the cruel amusement in their eyes. What he could not understand was the subtle mockery woven into Crix's words. The Vorthans had indeed selected their candidate very carefully. They had chosen Zura. Zura was what other Vorthans politely termed a genetic anomaly. Where typical Vorthans stood nearly 8 feet tall with sleek blue-gray skin and elegant proportions, she barely reached 5 feet and possessed what could only be described as a stocky build. Her skin tone was several shades darker than the norm, and her features were considered coarse by Vorthan standards. She was intelligent enough, but had never fit into their rigid social hierarchy. More importantly, from the Council's perspective, she was completely infertile. Vorthan biology was well understood, and Zara's condition was irreversible. The aliens found it hilarious that they could fulfill their diplomatic obligations, while ensuring that no hybrid offspring would ever result from this union. It was the perfect insult disguised as an honor. The ceremony took place 3 days later in the neutral space station orbiting Kepler 442b. Jake wore his dress uniform, while Zara appeared in traditional Vorthan ceremonial garments that seemed too large for her frame. The other ambassadors watched with barely suppressed glee as the two exchanged vows through the universal translator. Jake found himself genuinely moved by the ceremony despite its political origins. Zara seemed nervous, but determined to fulfill her duty. She had been told that this marriage would help prevent a devastating war between the species. She believed she was making a noble sacrifice for the greater good. After the ceremony, the couple was escorted to quarters aboard the human vessel Defiance. Jake had arranged for a comfortable suite with separate sleeping areas to avoid any awkwardness. He had no intention of forcing intimacy on someone who was essentially a political prisoner. But as the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. Zara proved to be remarkably intelligent and curious about human culture. She asked endless questions about Earth history, literature, and music. Jake found himself enjoying their conversations more than he had expected. Zara was fascinated by human creativity and emotional expression. Vorthan society was highly regimented, with little room for individual artistic endeavors. She had never seen anything like human poetry or heard music that stirred emotions rather than simply providing rhythmic accompaniment to work. Jake began teaching her to play chess and was amazed by how quickly she grasped the strategic concepts. She had an intuitive understanding of patterns and probability that impressed him. In return, she shared stories of Vorthan history and culture that helped him understand his new allies better. Neither of them spoke of the political implications of their marriage. Both understood that they were pawns in a larger game, but they began to find genuine companionship in their shared situation. Jake made sure Zara had access to the ship's library and cultural databases, while she helped him understand the nuances of galactic diplomacy. The Defiant spent several months touring human colonies and trading posts. Zara marveled at the diversity of human settlements and the adaptability of the species. Unlike other galactic civilizations that terraform worlds to match their homeworld conditions, humans seemed to adapt themselves to whatever environment they encountered. On Mars, she watched human engineers working in the thin atmosphere with minimal life support equipment. On Europa, she saw underwater cities that functioned in conditions that would be instantly fatal to most species. On Titan, she observed agricultural colonies that had somehow managed to make the toxic moon productive. What struck her most was how humans seemed to thrive in adversity. Where other species would avoid challenging environments, humans saw opportunities. They did not simply survive in hostile conditions. They found ways to flourish and create beauty, even in the most unlikely places. Jake noticed changes in Zara as well. She was standing straighter and speaking with more confidence. The constant criticism she had endured in Vorthan society had made her withdrawn and apologetic. Among humans who valued individual achievement and personal growth, she began to bloom. The crew of the Defiance accepted her without question. They were accustomed to working with different species and were more interested in her contributions than her appearance. Her insights into galactic politics proved invaluable during trade negotiations, and her quick grasp of human technology impressed the engineering staff. As the months passed, Jake and Zara found themselves drawn together by more than just political necessity. They shared meals and long conversations about everything from quantum physics to ancient poetry. They watched movies together and debated philosophy late into the ship's night cycle. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. What had begun as a diplomatic arrangement was becoming something deeper. Jake found himself looking forward to their time together and worried about her well-being when she seemed troubled. Zara discovered emotions she had never experienced before and began to understand what humans called love. The turning point came during a pirate attack near the Vega system. The Defiance was escorting a merchant convoy when raiders struck without warning. Jake rushed to the bridge, while Zara helped coordinate damage control from the secondary command center. During the battle, Zara displayed a tactical brilliance that surprised everyone. She quickly identified weaknesses in the enemy formation and suggested maneuvers that allowed the convoy to escape with minimal casualties. Her actions saved hundreds of lives and earned her the respect of the entire crew. That night, as they assessed the damage, Jake found Zara in the observation deck staring out at the stars. She turned to him with tears in her eyes and thanked him for showing her what it meant to be valued for who she was rather than what others expected her to be. Jake realized then that his feelings for her had evolved far beyond duty or companionship. This remarkable woman had become essential to his happiness, and he could not imagine returning to his previous life without her. When he told her this, she revealed that she felt the same way. Their relationship deepened over the following weeks. They spent their free time exploring the ship together and learning about each other's hopes and dreams. Jake shared stories of his childhood on Earth, while Zura described her lonely years as an outcast in Vorthan society. They began sharing quarters and eventually sharing a bed. Their physical intimacy was tender and meaningful despite the biological impossibility of reproduction. They found ways to express their love that transcended the limitations of their different species. Neither of them mentioned the sterility that made their union politically acceptable to the Galactic Council. Jake assumed it was a natural incompatibility between species, while Zara believed it was simply their fate. They were content to build a life together without children, and focused on their shared work and mutual devotion. The Defiance eventually returned to Earth for scheduled maintenance and crew rotation. Jake requested extended leave to spend time with Zara on his home planet. He wanted to show her the world that had shaped humanity and share with her the places that held meaning for him. Zara was amazed by Earth's natural beauty and biological diversity. She had never seen so many different species coexisting in complex ecosystems. Vorthan worlds were carefully managed with strictly controlled environments, but Earth seemed to thrive on chaos and constant change. They visited Jake's family farm in Kansas, where she learned about human agriculture and animal husbandry. She was fascinated by the emotional bonds between humans and their livestock, and the way farming communities supported each other through difficult seasons. In New York, she experienced human-urban culture and was overwhelmed by the energy and creativity of city life. She attended concerts and art exhibitions and began to understand how human creativity flourished in high-density environments. But it was during their visit to the Rocky Mountains that something unexpected happened. Zara began experiencing strange symptoms that initially seemed like altitude sickness. She was dizzy and nauseated, and had difficulty keeping food down. Jake was concerned and insisted they return to lower elevations immediately. The symptoms persisted even after they returned to sea level. Jake took her to a human medical facility where the doctors ran comprehensive tests. What they discovered shocked everyone involved. Zara was pregnant. The medical team confirmed the impossible. Not only was she carrying a child, but the fetus appeared to be developing normally despite the unprecedented genetic combination. The pregnancy was proceeding along human timelines, rather than the much longer Vorthan gestation period. Jake was speechless. He had never dared hope for children, and the news filled him with a joy he had never experienced. Zara was equally amazed and terrified. She had been told her entire life that she was incapable of reproduction, and now she was carrying the first human, Vorthan hybrid in galactic history. The medical team requested permission to study the pregnancy for scientific purposes, but Jake and Zara declined. They wanted to experience this miracle without turning it into a research project. They agreed to regular monitoring to ensure the health of both mother and child, but insisted on privacy for their family. Word of the pregnancy somehow leaked to the galactic press, and the reaction was immediate and explosive. The Galactic Council demanded an immediate investigation. The Vorthan Empire accused the humans of genetic manipulation and fraud. Other species began to question the legitimacy of the entire diplomatic marriage program. Ambassador Crix was particularly vocal in his denunciations. He claimed that the humans had somehow tampered with Zura's biology to create a false pregnancy for political advantage. He demanded that she be returned to Vorthan custody for proper medical examination. The human government refused to hand over one of their citizens, and Jake made it clear that he would protect his wife and unborn child by any means necessary. The diplomatic crisis threatened to undo years of carefully negotiated agreements, and several species began mobilizing their military forces. Jake and Zara found themselves at the center of a galactic incident that could potentially lead to war. They retreated to a secure facility on Luna, where Zara could receive proper medical care while being protected from the political turmoil surrounding their situation. The pregnancy progressed normally despite the unprecedented circumstances. The fetus appeared to be developing characteristics from both species, but leaning heavily toward human physiology. The doctors were amazed by the adaptability of the hybrid genetics and the apparent compatibility of the two species. Zara spent her time reading human literature and learning about Chile, during practices from different cultures. She was determined to be a good mother, despite having no positive role models from her own species. Jake researched everything he could find about pregnancy and childbirth, while trying to shield her from the political chaos their situation had created. The Galactic Council continued to debate the implications of the pregnancy. Some species saw it as proof that humans were more adaptable than previously believed, and began to reconsider their attitudes toward the upstart species. Others viewed it as a dangerous precedent that could lead to uncontrolled genetic mixing between species. The Vorthan Empire was in complete denial. They insisted that the pregnancy was impossible and demanded access to Zara for medical examination. When this was refused, they began spreading rumors that the entire situation was an elaborate hoax designed to manipulate galactic opinion. But the evidence was undeniable. Medical scans clearly showed a developing fetus with characteristics from both species. Independent observers confirmed the authenticity of the pregnancy and the biological impossibility of faking such detailed evidence. As Zara's pregnancy progressed, she began to show more confidence and strength than ever before. The realization that she was carrying a healthy child, despite decades of being told she was defective, gave her a sense of purpose and pride that transformed her entire personality. She began writing detailed journals about her experiences for her unborn child. She wanted to document not just the biological aspects of the pregnancy, but the emotional journey of discovering love and creating a family against impossible odds. Jake watched his wife blossom with amazement and growing love. The shy, uncertain woman he had married had become a fierce protector of their unborn child and a formidable advocate for their family's rights. She faced the galactic controversy with dignity and refused to be intimidated by threats or political pressure. The birth took place on a quiet Tuesday morning in the Luna Medical Facility. After 18 hours of labor, Zara delivered a healthy daughter, who immediately began crying with unmistakably human lungs. The baby had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, along with other features that seemed to blend the best of both species. Jake held his daughter for the first time and wept with joy. The tiny life in his arms represented hope for the future and proof that love could overcome even the most impossible obstacles. Zara watched her husband bond with their child and felt a satisfaction deeper than anything she had ever experienced. The news of the successful birth sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The first human, Vorthan hybrid, was not just alive but thriving. The baby appeared to have inherited enhanced intelligence from her mother and remarkable adaptability from her father. Medical scans showed brain development that exceeded normal parameters for both species. The Galactic Council was forced to acknowledge that the pregnancy and birth were genuine. The implications for interspecies relations were enormous. If humans could successfully reproduce with Vorthans, then the genetic barriers between species might be less absolute than previously believed. Ambassador Crick's position became increasingly untenable, as evidence mounted that the pregnancy was not only real, but had occurred naturally. Careful medical documentation and independent verification made it impossible to maintain the fraud allegations. More importantly, other Vorthans began to question the official narrative about Zara's supposed infertility. If she could carry a healthy child to term, then perhaps the medical establishment had been wrong about her condition. This raised uncomfortable questions about how many other Vorthans had been incorrectly classified as defective. The political ramifications extended far beyond the immediate diplomatic crisis. The successful birth proved that humans possessed genetic compatibility with at least one other species. This suggested that they might be more evolutionarily advanced than anyone had realized. Jake and Zara named their daughter Hope, both for obvious symbolic reasons, and because they genuinely believed she represented a new beginning for interspecies relations. The baby displayed remarkable alertness and seemed to respond to both human and Vorthan vocalizations. As Hope grew, it became clear that she had inherited the best traits from both species. She was physically hardy like her father, but possessed her mother's analytical intelligence. She seemed to instinctively understand complex concepts and showed an early aptitude for languages and mathematics. Family returned to Earth when Hope was 3 months old. Jake wanted his daughter to experience the world that had shaped humanity, while Zara was eager to continue her studies of human culture and society. They settled in a quiet coastal town where they could raise their child away from the political spotlight. But their privacy was not destined to last. Hope's existence had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The Galactic Council could no longer dismiss humans as a primitive species if they possessed the genetic flexibility to crossbreed with established civilizations. Other species began to reassess their relationships with humanity. The successful hybrid birth suggested that humans might be valuable allies rather than dangerous upstarts. Trade agreements that had been stalled for years suddenly moved forward as various species sought to improve their standing with the increasingly influential human government. The Vorthan Empire found itself in an increasingly isolated position. Their treatment of Zara as a disposable joke had backfired spectacularly, and now they faced the possibility of losing their status as a major galactic power. Other Vorthans began to demand explanations for why someone supposedly infertile had been able to reproduce successfully. Ambassador Crick was quietly reassigned to a remote posting, while new Vorthan leadership attempted to repair relations with humanity. They offered formal apologies for the diplomatic marriage scheme and requested opportunities to establish genuine cultural exchange programs. Jake and Zara watched these developments with mixture of satisfaction and concern. They had never sought to become political symbols, but their love story had inadvertently changed the course of galactic history. They focused on raising their daughter and building a life together, while the rest of the galaxy adjusted to the new reality. Hope continued to exceed all expectations for development and intelligence. By her first birthday, she was speaking in complete sentences in both English and Vorthan. She showed an intuitive understanding of mathematics and science that amazed her parents and the researchers who were quietly monitoring her progress. More importantly, she seemed to embody the best qualities of both species. She had her father's determination and optimism combined with her mother's analytical intelligence and emotional depth. She was curious about everything and approached new challenges with the confidence of someone who had never been told anything was impossible. The family's story became legendary throughout human space and gradually spread to other species as well. The joke bride who had been sent to humiliate humanity had instead become the mother of a new generation that promised to bridge the gaps between species and create unprecedented opportunities. Cooperation. Zara often reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from the loneliness of Vorthan society to the joy of human family life. She had been discarded as worthless by her own people, only to discover that she was carrying the genetic key to a new era of galactic civilization. Jake marveled at how completely his life had changed from that awkward diplomatic ceremony to the profound happiness of fatherhood. The woman who had been thrust upon him as a political burden had become his closest companion and the love of his life. As Hope grew older, she began to understand her unique position as the first of her kind. Rather than being burdened by the responsibility, she embraced it with the enthusiasm of youth. She spoke of growing up to be a bridge between worlds and helping other species learn to understand each other. The alien council members who had orchestrated the diplomatic marriage as a cruel joke now faced the consequences of their short-sightedness. The human Vorthan hybrid represented everything they had feared about human adaptability and genetic flexibility. They had inadvertently created proof that humans were not just another primitive species, but potentially the most evolutionarily advanced civilization in the galaxy. The story of Jake, Zara, and Hope became more than just a family tale. It became a symbol of how love and determination could overcome even the most impossible circumstances. It proved that what others saw as weakness or deficiency might actually be strength, waiting for the right conditions to flourish. Their daughter grew up knowing that she was special, but never feeling isolated or different. She was surrounded by love and support from both human and Vorthan communities, who had learned to see beyond the political implications of her existence to the promise she represented. The galaxy was forever changed by the birth of one small girl, who proved that the barriers between species were not as absolute as anyone had believed. The joke had become a miracle, and the miracle had become the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation and understanding. Years later, when Hope had children of her own, the story of the alien bride who returned pregnant would still be told throughout the galaxy. It would serve as a reminder that love could triumph over prejudice, and that the most unlikely unions could produce the most extraordinary results. The aliens who had sent Zara as a joke bride had indeed been surprised by her return, but their surprise had turned to shock and then to grudging respect as they realized that their casual cruelty had inadvertently changed the course of galactic history. The human they had tried to humiliate had instead become the father of a new generation that would reshape the relationship between all species. The joke had become the miracle, and the miracle had become the future.